A late-night emergency seemed like just another routine moment at the hospital, until a pregnant woman was rushed into the operating room in critical condition while her husband was nowhere to be found. Because right in the hospital lobby, he was down on one knee proposing to his mistress under the stunned eyes of nurses, doctors, and patients waiting for care. He thought no one would pay attention. He thought the moment would pass quietly, but he had no idea her father had just walked in, witnessing every second of that betrayal. What follows is a collision of guilt, power, and justice, far more intense than anything you expect as we begin this story. Tell us what time you are watching and where you are tuning in from. Drop a comment below. The first stab of pain hit Emily Carter so violently that it felt like someone had reached inside her abdomen and tried to twist the world out of her. She grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter to steady herself, but her knees buckled before she could breathe again. A warm liquid spread between her legs. When she looked down and saw the dark red stains spreading rapidly across the floor tiles, her breath caught in her throat. The babies. Her mind shrieked before her voice could. She pressed a trembling hand to her belly and reached for her phone with the other. She dialed Michael Reeves immediately. The phone rang once, twice, 5 times. No answer. She called again. Still nothing. Her vision blurred from the pain and the panic as she whispered a desperate plea into the empty air, hoping he might somehow hear her, despite not picking up. Her fingers slipped on the screen as another wave of agony hit. Sharper and deeper. She tried to stand but collapsed to the floor, her palms sliding through her own blood. She curled forward instinctively, trying to shield her stomach, even as her muscles spasmed in ways that felt unnatural and wrong. Her heart hammered wildly, but her breaths grew thin. With the last bit of strength she had, she reached the phone again and dialed emergency services. Her voice cracked as she told the dispatcher she was pregnant and bleeding heavily. Every second afterward felt like an eternity, until she heard the distant wail of sirens. By the time the paramedics reached her, she was shaking uncontrollably, half-conscious, and barely able to form words. They lifted her onto a gurney, her fingers instinctively clutching at the air as if searching for someone who should have been there. Inside the ambulance, the world changed into a blur of flashing lights and urgent commands. One paramedic held an oxygen mask over her face, while another checked the fetal monitors that beeped with an uneven rhythm. The sound of the baby's unstable heartbeats echoed like a countdown. Emily could not escape. She tried to ask if the babies were all right, but her voice came out as a gasp. The paramedic answered with gentle firmness, telling her to stay awake, to keep breathing, to hold on. Emily tried, but each contraction of pain made her body arch involuntarily. The medical team worked quickly, inserting IV lines, adjusting oxygen levels, and shouting numbers she no longer had the strength to understand. She stared at the roof of the ambulance, as streaks of city lights passed above her like fragments of a world she was falling out of. When the ambulance turned sharply toward the hospital entrance, Emily fought to lift her head. The movement outside the window caught her fading vision. She saw the bright sign of the luxury hotel across the street. Figures stepped out into the night, illuminated by warm golden lights, as if they belonged to another reality entirely. One of them looked familiar, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the easy confidence she had once fallen in love with. Michael, her husband. Her breath hitched, and she forced her hand up toward the small window on the ambulance door. She whispered his name, but her voice did not reach beyond the oxygen mask. Standing beside him, her arm linked with his, was a woman with sleek hair and a fitted dress. Olivia Grant, the woman Emily had once suspected and tried to forget. They were laughing. Michael leaned closer to whisper something in Olivia's ear, and the sight shattered something inside Emily more brutally than any physical pain. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to push herself upward, but the paramedic gently pressed her back. He told her not to move, that they were seconds from the hospital doors, that her babies needed her to stay calm. His voice reached her, as if from underwater. She tried one last time to lift her hand, pointing toward the hotel lights, but the paramedic misunderstood the gesture and told her help was waiting at the entrance. Emily could feel consciousness slipping away. The betrayal she had feared for months was no longer a suspicion. It was a truth standing under a golden hotel awning, while she bled out inside an ambulance that carried her life and her children's lives toward a slim chance. The hospital entrance burst open as the medical team rushed the gurney out. Nurses and doctors converged instantly, reading the numbers on her monitors with tense urgency. Emily's vision swayed between clarity and darkness, the fluorescent lights above her forming a tunnel that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the surgical wing. A nurse pressed a blood pressure cuff tighter around her arm, frowning at the results. Someone else adjusted the oxygen mask and called out orders that echoed down the hall. Emily felt the world tilt beneath her as the gurney accelerated. The baby's heartbeats appeared on a screen beside her, the lines jagged and frightening. Another contraction seized her entire body. She cried out, or thought she did. Her throat was too dry to tell. A doctor leaned into her field of vision and asked if she could hear him. She tried to nod, but only managed a slight movement. He spoke quickly, explaining that she was losing a dangerous amount of blood and needed to be taken into emergency surgery immediately. Emily tried to ask about her babies, but he gently told her to hold on, to stay with them as long as she could. Her eyes fluttered, but she refused to close them. She wanted to see her children again. She wanted Michael to walk through the doors and prove she was not alone. She wanted so many things she no longer believed possible. The gurney slammed into the double doors of the surgical wing. The impact jolted her back into a sharp awareness of her surroundings. The glowing red sign above the doors read, "Emergency Surgery." Nurses yelled for more units of blood. Someone counted her pulse out loud. She felt herself slipping again, her limbs heavy, her chest tight. She grasped at the sheet beneath her, as if holding on harder might keep her conscious for one more breath. One nurse placed a steadying hand on her arm and whispered that she was brave, that they were going to do everything to save her and the babies. The last thing Emily saw was the blinding white light of the operating room as the doors swung open. Her gurney raced forward into the cold brightness. The doctors surrounded her in a blur of urgent movement. Then the doors closed behind them, with a metallic finality that echoed down the silent hallway. The restaurant inside the Avalon Grand Hotel glowed with warm golden lights, soft music, and the faint sound of crystal glasses touching. Michael Reeves sat at a private corner table, a place he had chosen for its privacy and its elegance. He leaned back in his chair with the calm confidence of a man who believed the night belonged to him alone. Across from him, Olivia Grant swirled a glass of white wine between her fingers, her lips curving into the pleased smile of someone who had finally gotten what she wanted. The air between them sparkled with flirtation and selfish triumph, untouched by the reality unfolding at the hospital several miles away. Michael lifted his phone from the table, not to check the dozens of missed calls, but to silence the device entirely. The restaurant inside the Avalon Grand Hotel glowed with warm golden lights, soft music, and the faint sound of crystal glasses touching. Michael Reeves sat at a private corner table, a place he had chosen for its privacy and its elegance. He leaned back in his chair with the calm confidence of a man who believed the night belonged to him alone. He slid his thumb across the screen and pressed the side button until the display went dark. The moment the phone turned black, it buzzed again in his palm with a persistent urgency that seemed almost alive. Michael exhaled sharply, set the phone face down, and muttered that people needed to learn boundaries. Olivia watched him with a knowing look, her eyes narrowing with calculated softness. "Is that her again?" she asked, with a light tone that hid a deeper intention. Across from him, Olivia Grant swirled a glass of white wine between her fingers, her lips curving into the pleased smile of someone who had finally gotten what she wanted. The air between them sparkled with flirtation and selfish triumph, untouched by the reality unfolding at the hospital several miles away. Michael lifted his phone from the table, not to check the dozens of missed calls, but to silence the device entirely. "Yo." Unseen by Michael, his phone lit up again on the table. The screen displayed a call from the hospital, tagged with the red emergency icon that would have made any other husband turn cold with fear. Instead, he gently pushed the phone farther away so it would not vibrate against the silverware. Meanwhile, in a brightly lit hallway at Mercy Ridge Hospital, a nurse stood gripping Emily's chart with trembling hands. "We have called her husband 12 times. Still nothing." Another nurse shook her head in disbelief. "We need a signature for the consent form. If we cannot reach him, we will have to proceed without it." The urgency in their voices echoed through the corridor, but none of it reached the man who should have been there. Emily lay unconscious in a room nearby, her body weakening, the monitors flickering like fading candle flames. The medical team worked around her with increasing tension, preparing equipment they might need at any second. No one could wait much longer. Back at the hotel, Olivia set down her wine glass. Her fingers traced the rim, but her expression held a different kind of tension now. "Michael," she said quietly, "I saw a message flash earlier. It was from Mercy Ridge. That is not a random caller." There was hesitation in her voice for the first time that evening. She was selfish, but she was not blind. Michael's jaw flexed. He picked up his phone reluctantly, staring at the long list of missed calls that filled the screen. The name Mercy Ridge Medical Center appeared again and again, and the red emergency symbol repeated beside each one. He knew precisely what it meant, but his expression did not soften. Instead, irritation crossed his features, the kind that came from someone who felt inconvenienced rather than needed. "She is always calling for attention," he said quietly, though a flicker of unease passed through his eyes. If it were actually serious, they would handle it. He placed the phone down again. "Tonight is not the night to let her pull me back." Olivia searched his face, and for a moment, a small part of her wondered how a man capable of such indifference could ever love anyone. Still, ambition overshadowed hesitation, and she chose silence. The waiter arrived with their entrees, and Michael thanked him with a smooth, effortless charm. The scene looked perfect to anyone who walked by. Two attractive people enjoying an expensive dinner, unaware of the life that threatened to slip away in a hospital bed far from the glittering lights of this room. At the hospital, a doctor stepped out of the emergency unit with urgency in his stride. "We need consent for a high-risk procedure," he said. "The babies are unstable and the mother is deteriorating quickly." A nurse held up the phone once more, her voice strained. "Doctor, we have called him repeatedly." The doctor closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded. "Document everything. We proceed with or without him." His words struck the air with a finality that sounded like the closing of a door Emily had once hoped would remain open. In the hotel, Michael's phone buzzed again. The screen lit up brightly, casting a cold white glow across the tablecloth. Olivia saw the hospital name clearly this time, and her breath caught. Something inside her, something faint but human, stirred. "Michael," she said softly, "maybe you should answer, just in case." Michael lifted the phone. His thumb hovered over the green icon. For a brief second, he imagined Emily lying in a hospital bed, imagined nurses rushing around her, imagined the possibility that something truly irreversible might be happening. He exhaled slowly as the phone continued vibrating in his hand. Then he pressed the red icon without hesitation. The call ended instantly. A sharp silence settled between him and Olivia. She looked at him, he looked at her, and the world on the other side of that phone call continued to fall apart. The world returned to Emily in fragments, like shards of glass reflecting pieces of a past she could not fully grasp. A soft humming filled her ears at first, then a steady beeping that rose and fell in erratic intervals. It took several seconds for her to realize the sound came from the monitors attached to her. She tried to lift her hand, but it felt impossibly heavy, as if it belonged to someone else. Her eyelids fluttered, pulling apart just enough for her to see bright lights above her, stark and cold. The ceiling looked unfamiliar. The room smelled of antiseptic and urgency. She was no longer in her home. She was not even in the ambulance. She was somewhere deeper, somewhere colder. Then the pain returned, dull at first, then sharp, then a wave so intense she gasped. She reached for her stomach with a trembling hand and felt the wetness of dried blood crusted against her skin. The babies! Her mind whispered the thought before her lips could form words. She tried to speak, but her throat burned, and the sound that escaped her was barely a whisper. The lights blurred again as panic tightened inside her chest. A nurse noticed her movement and hurried to her bedside. "Emily, can you hear me?" she asked, her voice steady yet strained. Emily blinked slowly, signaling yes. The nurse leaned closer, adjusting a tube near Emily's arm. The seriousness in her expression was unmistakable. "You are losing too much blood. We are preparing you for emergency surgery. Stay with me if you can." Emily tried to ask for Michael. Her lips moved, but no sound came. She swallowed hard and tried again, the word catching in her throat. "My husband." The nurse hesitated for a fraction of a second, and even that small pause told Emily the answer before it was spoken. "We are trying to reach him," the nurse said gently. "We have been calling." "No." Emily's chest rose unevenly, and her gaze drifted toward the IV line. The truth settled heavily in her mind. If they were still trying, then he was not here. He had not answered. He had not come. A familiar ache, one she had felt in small doses for months, spread through her like venom. She remembered the nights she stayed up alone, the excuses, the silences, the way he drifted from her without ever admitting it. She had hoped the babies would bring him back. She had believed that the life growing inside her would remind him of the love they once shared. Her vision blurred as the monitor beside her suddenly spiked, the beeping growing faster and louder. The nurse called out for help. Another nurse rushed in, followed by a doctor who approached with rapid steps. "Her heart rate is unstable," he said while checking the fetal monitor. The baby's heartbeats flickered on the screen in frantic, uneven rhythms. The babies! Her mind whispered the thought before her lips could form words. She tried to speak, but her throat burned, and the sound that escaped her was barely a whisper. The lights blurred again as panic tightened inside her chest. A nurse noticed her movement and hurried to her bedside. "Emily, can you hear me?" she asked, her voice steady yet strained. Emily blinked slowly, signaling yes. The nurse leaned closer, adjusting a tube near Emily's arm. She held onto that memory desperately, as if gripping it would anchor her to the light, slipping away from her. But the next memory cut through her like a blade. She saw him turning away from her in their bedroom last month, brushing off her tears with a cold expression. She heard Olivia's name whispered in places it never should have been. She felt again the fear that had grown in her chest each day. He came home later and later, smelling of perfume that was not hers. Her breath quickened. The doctor placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Emily, I need you to stay awake. We are getting ready to take you into surgery." His voice held authority, but there was compassion in it too. She blinked slowly, fighting the heaviness in her eyes. "My babies," she whispered. "Please, save them." "We will," he said softly. "But we need you to let us help you." Emily's gaze drifted to the door, as if she expected Michael to burst through it in the next second. She imagined him rushing to her bedside, taking her hand, telling her the affair was a terrible mistake. She imagined him begging forgiveness. She imagined him crying, but the door stayed closed. Footsteps came and went around her, but none belonged to him. The absence was louder than the machines. The nurse adjusted her mask, checking the oxygen flow. "We cannot reach your husband," she said quietly, as if confessing a truth she wished were different. Emily's throat tightened. She nodded slowly. She no longer had the strength to deny what she already knew. He was not coming. Not for her. Not for the babies. The last sliver of hope she clung to dissolved into the sterile air around her. The doctor signaled the team. "We need to move. Her pressure is dropping." The gurney lurched forward as they began rolling her toward the operating room. Lights streaked above her like falling stars, and each one pulled her deeper into a tunnel of fading awareness. Voices echoed around her, some urgent, some distant. Her own heartbeat thudded unevenly in her ears, as if it were struggling to decide whether to continue. She felt her consciousness slipping like sand through her fingers. She fought to keep her eyes open, but lost ground with every breath. A mask descended slowly toward her face. The doctor's voice softened. "This will help you. You need to rest now." Emily tried to speak one last time, though she was not sure what she wanted to say. Perhaps she wanted to tell them to save the babies first. Perhaps she wanted to whisper the truth that had broken her heart in the ambulance. Perhaps she wanted to call for the man who had once promised to stay by her side. The mask touched her face. Her vision flickered. The world dimmed. And then everything went black. The sliding doors of Mercy Ridge Hospital opened with a soft hiss as Michael Reeves walked in with the slow confidence of a man who believed nothing in his life demanded urgency. The scent of disinfectant drifted through the air, along with muffled voices of nurses moving quickly through the halls. None of it seemed to affect Michael. He had one hand in his pocket and the other loosely wrapped around Olivia Grant's waist. The sliding doors of Mercy Ridge Hospital opened with a soft hiss as Michael Reeves walked in with the slow confidence of a man who believed nothing in his life demanded urgency. The scent of disinfectant drifted through the air, along with muffled voices of nurses moving quickly through the halls. None of it seemed to affect Michael. He had one hand in his pocket and the other loosely wrapped around Olivia Grant's waist. A nurse behind the counter looked up, her expression tight from exhaustion. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm Michael Reeves," he said casually as he signed his name. "I was told to come in and approve a surgery." The nurse blinked, almost taken aback by his tone. She handed him a clipboard with the necessary forms. "Your wife is in critical condition. We have been trying to reach you." Michael did not even glance at her fully. He picked up the pen and began signing without reading a single line. "Yes, yes," he murmured, his expression bored. "Just tell me where to sign." Olivia shifted uneasily at his side. She watched his hand move swiftly across the page, and then looked toward the hallway where medical personnel hurried past with tense urgency. Something in her chest tightened. She had never intended for things to go this far. The sliding doors of Mercy Ridge Hospital opened with a soft hiss as Michael Reeves walked in with the slow confidence of a man who believed nothing in his life demanded urgency. The scent of disinfectant drifted through the air, along with muffled voices of nurses moving quickly through the halls. None of it seemed to affect Michael. He had one hand in his pocket and the other loosely wrapped around Olivia Grant's waist. "Ugh!" Michael looked at her as though she had suggested something absurd. "Emily will be fine. She is always fine. She just likes to make things dramatic. The doctors know what they are doing." He placed the clipboard on the counter with a soft thud, completely indifferent to the nurse who watched them with a mixture of disbelief and concern. He then took Olivia's hand and guided her to the seating area, as if the two of them were waiting for a table in a restaurant instead of news about a life-threatening emergency. Olivia sat beside him, though her posture was stiff. The sounds of the hospital unnerved her. A distant monitor beeped steadily. A gurney rolled past with a rush of footsteps. A doctor gave rapid instructions to a nurse near the elevators. It all contrasted painfully with Michael's eerie calm. She turned to him, her voice soft. "Michael, I am nervous." Michael gave a small, dismissive smile and reached into his jacket. "You have no reason to be." Olivia frowned. "I think I do. This does not feel right." Michael ignored the comment. He pulled out a small velvet box and held it in his palm. The hospital lights made the dark fabric shimmer in his hand. Olivia's breath caught. Her entire body went still as she stared at the box. "Michael, what are you doing?" she whispered. He shifted slightly so he was facing her fully. His expression changed from casual indifference to something almost theatrical, as if he had been waiting for this moment far longer than he had waited for news about his wife's condition. "Olivia," he said softly, "tonight is ours. I refuse to let anything take that away." Her heart thumped in a confused rhythm. "But your wife—" "My marriage has been dead for a long time," he cut in. "You know that. All that is left now is to make our future official." Olivia looked around, as if expecting someone to stop him, but everyone nearby was busy, rushing from one emergency to the next, unaware or unwilling to involve themselves. The nurse behind the counter paused when she noticed the velvet box. Her eyebrows rose in stunned disbelief, but she said nothing. She had seen enough heartbreak to last a lifetime, yet this was a new kind of cruelty. Michael slowly rose from his seat and took a step back, positioning himself on one knee before Olivia. The gesture was elegant. It would have been romantic anywhere else. But here, in a hospital filled with cries, alarms, and the echo of running feet, it felt profoundly wrong. "Michael," Olivia breathed, her voice trembling. "Please, not here." "Yes, here," he insisted. "Because I want you to know that nothing, not even the chaos tonight, can change what I feel." He opened the box. Inside, a large diamond ring sparkled under the fluorescent lights. It gleamed with a brightness that belonged to a ballroom, not a trauma wing. Around them, a few nurses halted mid-step. A security guard paused beside a vending machine. Even a doctor walking by with a clipboard glanced over, stunned. The world seemed to tilt for a brief moment. Olivia pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed and confused. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but never like this, never with such a cold indifference toward another woman's suffering. Michael looked up at her, eyes locked on hers. "Say yes." A hush fell over the waiting area. The hospital lights flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the room. Somewhere upstairs, an intercom crackled with an emergency update. But here, in this pocket of frozen time, all eyes were on them. Olivia hesitated. Her lips parted. "Michael, I—" But she did not finish. The ring sparkled. The world held its breath. The proposal hung in the air, suspended in a place it never should have existed, and the next moment would shatter everything. David Carter moved through the automatic doors of Mercy Ridge Hospital with long, urgent strides. His suitcase still swung from his hand, the wheels barely touching the floor as he pulled it behind him. He had come straight from the airport after receiving a frantic voicemail from a nurse who only said Emily was being rushed into emergency surgery and that her condition was deteriorating fast. There had been no time to think, no time to breathe, only the instinct of a father who knew his daughter needed him. His heart pounded with dread as he searched the lobby for someone who could tell him where she was. He walked toward the reception desk, but halfway there, something in his peripheral vision pulled him sharply to a stop. The scene did not register at first. It was too surreal, too grotesque to make sense in a hospital filled with grief, urgency, and the fight for life. A man in a tailored jacket was kneeling in the waiting area. A velvet box sat open in his hand. A woman in a fitted dress covered her mouth, stunned by the brilliance of the diamond ring sparkling beneath the fluorescent lights. People who were passing by had stopped. Nurses froze mid-step. A young orderly held a tray of supplies and stared in disbelief. David's breath caught in his chest as he slowly turned his head toward the man kneeling on the floor. Michael Reeves, his son-in-law, the man who should have been standing at Emily's bedside, the man who should have been holding her hand while she fought for her life. A cold stillness washed over David, the kind that came before storms, when the world paused as if sensing something enormous and unstoppable about to break. He felt his fingers tighten around the suitcase handle until the leather dug into his palm. Olivia Grant, who stood before Michael, looked torn between excitement and discomfort. She glanced nervously around the lobby, aware that the moment felt wrong, yet unwilling to step away from the ring glittering before her. Michael stared at her with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, oblivious to the destruction his actions had already carved into the night. A murmur spread through the hospital lobby as people began whispering to one another. One teenager near the vending machine lifted his phone and started recording. A middle-aged man waiting for test results elbowed his wife and pointed at the scene. Two nurses exchanged horrified looks. The security guard by the corridor leaned forward slightly, unsure whether he needed to intervene or simply bear witness. David's jaw tightened. He set down his suitcase quietly and took a few slow steps forward. Each step echoed on the polished floor, until the entire waiting room seemed to fall silent. Michael did not notice him at first. He was too focused on the woman before him, too wrapped up in his own moment to sense the presence walking toward him with growing fury. Olivia was the first to see David approaching. Her smile vanished instantly. She stepped back as if a cold wind had swept through the lobby. Michael frowned at her sudden tension and began to rise from his kneeling position, confused by the shift in her expression. When he turned and saw David standing there, the color drained from his face. David's eyes were sharp, filled not with confusion but with an icy clarity that made the room feel smaller. He stood completely still for a long moment, taking in the sight before him. His son-in-law kneeling before another woman, while his daughter lay on an operating table, fighting to stay alive. His voice cut through the silence with a weight that made everyone flinch. "My daughter is upstairs," he said, each word slow and precise, "fighting for her life." "I didn't—" Michael opened his mouth to respond, but David continued, his voice never rising, yet somehow louder than everything else in the room. "And this is what you choose to do, at a hospital, while she bleeds and struggles to survive." A nurse behind the counter bowed her head, unable to look at him or at Michael. Olivia took another step back, her face pale and stricken, unsure whether she should stay still or disappear. Michael swallowed hard. "David, I did not mean—" His voice trembled as the reality of what he had done crashed over him. "You did not mean to do what?" David asked quietly. "To abandon her, to ignore every call, to let her face death alone." The teenager who had been recording lowered his phone slightly, caught between fear and fascination. People held their breath as the tension in the lobby grew thick enough to choke. Even the distant sound of rolling gurneys dimmed beneath the pressure of the moment. Michael lowered his gaze, unable to defend himself. Olivia stood frozen, unsure whether to run or apologize. David took one more step toward them, and for the first time, Michael stumbled backward. "You had one responsibility," David said. "Stand by her side. be there when she needed you most, and instead, you chose this. He glanced coldly at the ring, still visible in Michael's open hand. You chose selfishness. You chose betrayal. Silence swallowed the room. Even the beeping monitors behind the glass partition seemed to pause. Olivia whispered, "We did not know she was." But her voice died when David turned his gaze toward her. "You knew enough," he said simply. A resident doctor rushed past then, breaking the stillness for only a second before realizing he had walked straight through something monumental. He slowed and stepped aside, unsure whether he should interrupt. At that exact moment, the hospital intercom crackled overhead. A long beep filled the lobby, followed by the tense voice of a nurse. "Code red, emergency in operating room 3. The announcement echoed through the halls, bouncing off the walls like a siren pulled straight from the heart of panic. David closed his eyes for a single second, the words hitting him like a blow. Operating room 3, Emily's room. He opened them again, the fury melting into something deeper. Fear, love, determination. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the elevators, leaving Michael frozen in the middle of his half-finished proposal, and the whole hospital watched him go. David Carter moved through the hallway with steps that were quicker than he intended, driven by a force he could no longer contain. The announcement from the intercom still echoed in his mind as he reached the double doors of the restricted wing. The words "Code Red" clung to him like ice. He pushed through the doors and immediately sought out the first medical staff member he could find. A nurse recognized his expression instantly and gestured for him to follow her. "Mr. Carter, Dr. Peterson is waiting for you," she said, her voice tight. "He needs to speak with you before the surgery progresses." David nodded without slowing down. Every corner of the hospital smelled like sterilizing agents and fear. He could feel both clinging to his throat as he rounded another hallway. Dr. Peterson stood near a workstation, flipping through Emily's chart with a tension that made the pages tremble slightly in his hands. The moment he saw David, he stepped forward. "Mr. Carter," he said, lowering his voice into something steady. "Your daughter is in critical condition. We are doing everything we can, but she came in with severe hemorrhaging. The babies were in distress. We had to begin the procedure immediately." David felt his stomach twist, but his voice remained calm. "Tell me the truth. How bad is it?" Dr. Peterson hesitated before answering. "It is extremely serious. She lost a dangerous amount of blood before she arrived. She was conscious for brief moments, but barely. If she had arrived any later, we might be having a different conversation." He paused. "We attempted to reach her husband. We called repeatedly." Those words made something inside David snap into perfect clarity. He looked directly into the doctor's eyes. He never answered. The doctor's silence was confirmation enough. A nurse nearby swallowed hard. "We documented every call, sir. It is in the system." David felt a heat rise in his chest, not from anger alone but from knowing Emily had gone through her terror alone. She had been awake long enough to understand that the person she loved most had not come. She had been aware enough to feel that abandonment. The thought hit him harder than the news of the surgery itself. "I want to see the call logs," David said quietly. Dr. Peterson nodded and turned to the wall monitor. With a few taps on the screen, he pulled up the record. Timestamps appeared in neat columns. The hospital had called at 8:13, 8:18, 8:21, 8:27, 8:33, 8:37, and so on. The list continued for nearly half an hour. Every call marked as unanswered. Everyone flagged as urgent. David stared at the screen until the lines blurred. "What about security footage from the lobby?" he asked, his voice low. The nurse beside him hesitated. "We can pull it up, sir, but it might upset you." David's answer came without a second of delay. "Show it to me." The nurse nodded and guided him to a nearby security station. The officer on duty, Marcus Hill, straightened when he saw David approach. Marcus had known the Carter family for years, due to the hospital's long-standing partnership with the Carter Foundation. He pulled up the footage without question. The screen flickered to life. At first, it showed the sliding doors of the main entrance opening. Michael walked in, Olivia beside him, the two of them looking more like guests at a gala than visitors in a trauma hospital. The moment Michael signed the surgery papers played out on the screen. His posture was casual, his attention entirely focused on Olivia, He signed without asking a single question. David watched every careless stroke of the pen. Then the camera switched to a different angle. The footage showed Michael and Olivia moving to the waiting area. It showed Olivia sitting nervously while Michael reached into his jacket. It showed him kneeling with a ring in his hand. It showed Emily's husband proposing marriage in the very building where Emily fought for her life. David said nothing, but the silence around him thickened. The nurse wiped tears from her cheeks. Marcus looked away, unable to watch the moment any longer. Dr. Peterson sighed softly and placed a hand on the edge of the desk as if steadying himself. David kept watching until the moment he arrived on screen. He saw his own reaction, the shock, the disbelief, the fury. He finally looked away. He understood everything now. Not only had Michael abandoned her out of selfishness, he had done it intentionally. He had ignored every call. He had chosen to be anywhere except by the side of the woman he vowed to protect. David's voice was quiet when he spoke, but its force made every person in the room stand straighter. He is not going near her. Not past this floor, not near the operating room, not even near the waiting area. Do you understand? Marcus nodded immediately. You have my word, Mr. Carter. I will personally make sure he stays away. David turned to the nurse. If he asks for information, you do not give it to him. She nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Dr. Peterson exhaled. We will update you as soon as we have any change. For now, all we can do is fight for her. You crumb. David placed a hand on the back of a chair to steady himself. His body felt heavy, but his mind had never been clearer. Emily's marriage had been unraveling for months. He knew that. He had seen her quiet sadness growing. He had seen her shrink every time Michael walked into a room, pretending not to notice her. But he had not realized how deliberate the neglect had become. How cruel. How calculated. A file lay on the table beside the monitor. Emily's chart, her medical crisis, her emergency report. He reached for it and gripped the folder so tightly, the edges bent beneath the pressure of his hand. His eyes hardened, no longer shaken by shock but sharpened by purpose. He was no longer only Emily's father. He was now every force she had ever needed, and he would not let her be hurt again. In the cold glow of the hospital's fluorescent lights, David Carter squared his shoulders. The fight had begun. David Carter stood in the dimly lit hallway, still holding Emily's medical file in one hand. The weight of it dragged at him in ways he had not expected. He could feel the exhaustion gathering in his bones, yet none of it slowed him. The world outside these hallways had faded to nothing. Only one mission mattered now, and he could sense the shift inside him, the familiar clarity he had relied on throughout decades of business wars and corporate storms. This time, the battlefield was personal. A middle-aged man waiting for test results elbowed his wife and pointed at the scene. Two nurses exchanged horrified looks. The security guard by the corridor leaned forward slightly, unsure whether he needed to intervene or simply bear witness. David's jaw tightened. He set down his suitcase quietly and took a few slow steps forward. Each step echoed on the polished floor until the entire waiting room seemed to fall silent. Michael did not notice him at first. He marched toward the elevator, only to find Marcus Hill stepping into his path with the authority of someone who had already been briefed. "You cannot go upstairs," Marcus said, folding his arms. Michael blinked in disbelief. "She is my wife." "Not tonight," Marcus replied. "Mr. Carter has given explicit instructions. You do not go near the surgical wing." Michael scoffed. "You think he can tell me what to do?" Marcus did not flinch. "Yes, he can, and so can I. Do not test me. I am 10 minutes away. Do not speak to Michael. Do not confront him further. Let me handle that part." "I will not confront him," David said coldly, "but he will not come near my daughter again." He ended the call. His hands tightened around the phone. The decision had been made. The line between family and enemy had been drawn. Downstairs, Michael wandered the lobby with Olivia trailing behind him in anxious silence. The thrill of the proposal had evaporated the moment David arrived. He marched toward the elevator, only to find Marcus Hill stepping into his path with the authority of someone who had already been briefed. "You cannot go upstairs," Marcus said, folding his arms. Michael blinked in disbelief. "She is my wife." "Not tonight," Marcus replied. "Mr. Carter has given explicit instructions. You do not go near the surgical wing." Michael scoffed. "You think he can tell me what to do?" Marcus did not flinch. "Yes, He can, and so can I. Do not test me. Though Michael's jaw clenched, but something in Marcus's steady stare made him back up a step. The lobby felt smaller. The walls seemed to tilt. Olivia hovered behind him, wringing her hands. The weight of what they had done pressed heavily on her chest now. The diamond ring she had once wanted so desperately now felt like it was trapping her fingers in ice. Meanwhile, Robert Hale arrived through the main doors, his presence commanding instant attention. He walked briskly past Michael without acknowledging him and found David upstairs near the restricted hallway. The two men exchanged a brief nod, the kind that carried years of loyalty and unspoken understanding. Robert opened his briefcase and laid it on a side table. I have a team pulling hospital phone logs as we speak. Every unanswered emergency call is being documented. We also retrieved the security footage. He slid a folder across the table. The proposal. The moment he ignored the last call. The timestamps match. David did not open the folder. He did not need to. He had seen it with his own eyes. He only said, "This will be enough." "It will destroy him," Robert replied. "Financially, publicly, legally. The court will not look kindly on a husband who abandoned his pregnant wife in a life-threatening emergency." David nodded once. "Good. That is the intention." Robert gathered the rest of his materials with swift efficiency. The next step is to secure witness statements. Several nurses have already agreed. So has the security officer downstairs. There is also a teenager who recorded the proposal. He is willing to share the video. David inhaled slowly. "Get it all." Robert hesitated just slightly. "Are you ready for the consequences of this?" David looked toward the glowing red sign above the operating room doors. "The only consequence I care about is my daughter's survival." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. The call was answered almost immediately. "David," came the calm, sharp voice on the other end. "I am already on my way," the hospital called. "I know everything." "Robert," David said, his voice low, "bring everything you have. I want documentation, statements, footage, timestamps, medical records, call logs, and anything that exposes what he did tonight." "You will have more than you expect," Robert Hale replied. Only the thin glow of light seeped through the edges, flickering with movement on the other side. Machines hummed. Footsteps rushed back and forth. He could not see Emily, but he could feel her presence as if a thread still connected them, stretched thin but unbroken. He placed a hand gently on the wall beside the door. The cool surface grounded him. For a moment, he let himself remember Emily as a child, running barefoot across the lawn, laughing as he chased her. He remembered her teenage years, her quiet strength, her brilliant mind. And he remembered holding her hand the day she told him she was pregnant, her voice trembling with joy. He would not let tonight be the end of her story. Behind him, the elevator chimed softly. Michael's voice echoed briefly, raised in frustration. Marcus responded firmly, refusing entry again. Olivia murmured something that sounded like regret. The chaos was still there, a low growl beneath the surface, but David blocked it out. All he cared about was the woman on the other side of the door. He straightened his shoulders. His eyes hardened again, transforming grief into resolve. He would protect her. He would defend her. He would fight for her. David Carter stood guard at the door of the operating room, ready for whatever came next, determined to face it for her. The hallway outside Operating Room 3 had settled into a tense stillness. The frantic rush that had consumed the previous hour had faded into a suspended silence, broken only by the distant hum of machines and the soft scuff of shoes against the polished floor. David Carter stood motionless, his hand still resting against the cool wall beside the door. He had not moved since the surgical team had taken Emily inside. Time stretched and twisted around him, every minute feeling like an hour, every shadow a reminder of how close he had come to losing her. His phone buzzed more than once. Messages from board members, concerned staff, even his own security team. He ignored every one of them. Nothing mattered except the life being fought for behind the door in front of him. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing slowly, allowing the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator inside the room to guide him through the worst of his fear. Then he heard footsteps, sharp, hurried, purposeful. He opened his eyes as Dr. Peterson pushed through the surgical doors, the bright light spilling into the hallway for a brief second, before fading again as the doors closed behind him. The doctor's mask hung loosely around his neck now, and his forehead glistened with the sheen of effort. He exhaled, straightened, and looked directly at David. David's breath caught. The world seemed to tilt slightly toward the doctor, as if everything depended on a single sentence. "She is alive," Dr. Peterson said quietly. His voice carried the weight of exhaustion, but the relief beneath it was unmistakable. "And the babies are alive as well." For a moment, David could not speak. His throat tightened, and an ache spread across his chest, so fierce he had to place a hand there. He had prepared himself for the worst, bracing for news that would shatter whatever remained of his world. Instead, he heard words that brought him back from the edge. He shut his eyes, swallowed hard, and whispered, "Thank God." Dr. Peterson nodded. "It was close, very close. She lost a significant amount of blood. We were balancing 2 lives at once, but she held on. She is stable now, though weak. The babies are small, and they will need monitoring, but they are breathing on their own." David let out a long breath he did not realize he had been holding. His shoulders sagged for the first time that night, the weight of fear melting into something softer, something almost fragile. "Can I see her?" "In a moment," Dr. Peterson said. "We are cleaning up and transferring her to the recovery unit. She will be unconscious for some time." Footsteps echoed from the far end of the hall. David turned to see Michael approaching with a mixture of desperation and indignation on his face. Olivia trailed behind him, her expression pale and tight. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the wall, but Michael marched forward with the entitlement of someone who had never been denied access to anything in his life. "I need an update on my wife," Michael said as he neared them. "I heard the surgery is over. I have a right to know." Marcus Hill stepped out from a nearby doorway, positioning himself between Michael and the operating room. "You are not allowed past this point," he said firmly. Michael bristled. "I told you before, I am her husband. You cannot keep me away." David turned slowly, fixing Michael with a gaze that froze the air between them. "You lost the right to call yourself her husband tonight." Michael's mouth opened, but no words came out. His eyes darted between David, the doctor, and Marcus, as if trying to understand how quickly his authority had vanished. Dr. Peterson added in a calm tone, "Mr. Reeves, your wife is stable. That is all you need to know at this time." Michael took a step forward. Marcus moved instantly, blocking him again. "I said you are not allowed near her," Marcus repeated. "What gives you that authority?" Michael snapped. David answered before Marcus could. "I do." He reached inside his coat pocket and withdrew a thin folder that Robert Hale had given him minutes earlier. Inside were emergency legal documents drafted while the surgery was underway. David opened the folder but did not hand it to Michael. Instead, he held it just far enough for Michael to see the header. "Medical Power of Attorney Transfer," the document read. Beside it was a notarized signature confirming temporary emergency guardianship. Michael's face drained of color. "You cannot do that," he whispered. "I can," David said, his voice low but ice-cold. "And I did. As of this moment, you are not permitted to make decisions for Emily or the babies. You forfeited that privilege when you abandoned her during a medical crisis." Olivia looked away, shame coloring her features. Michael sputtered, searching for an argument that did not exist. "I did not abandon her. I did not think." "You did not think at all," David said. "And now, your access is revoked." Dr. Peterson cleared his throat gently. "Mr. Carter, we are ready to move her to recovery now." David nodded, his attention snapping back to Emily's well-being. "Lead the way." Michael lunged forward as if he might try to follow, but Marcus stepped into his path with a firmness that left no room for negotiation. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be," the guard warned. Michael froze, chest heaving, powerless for the first time in years. David walked with Dr. Peterson toward the new room. The doors opened, revealing a dimly lit recovery chamber where nurses moved quietly, preparing the bed for Emily. Time stretched and twisted around him, every minute feeling like an hour, every shadow a reminder of how close he had come to losing her. His phone buzzed more than once. Messages from board members, concerned staff, even his own security team. He ignored every one of them. Nothing mattered except the life being fought for behind the door in front of him. Emily was protected, and Michael Reeves no longer held any power over her life. David stepped into the recovery room as the door behind him closed. Now Olivia could feel the walls of the hospital closing around them. People were still staring. A nurse whispered to another behind the desk. Someone held up their phone, as if trying to capture another angle. Olivia tugged at Michael's elbow. "We should leave," she whispered. "This is too much." Michael shook her off. "I need to know what is happening with Emily." Olivia stiffened. "Now you care." Michael glared at her, but the words lodged in his throat. News spread through the city long before sunrise. It began with a short clip recorded by a teenager in the hospital lobby, a shaky video that captured Michael Reeves kneeling in front of Olivia Grant with a velvet ring box in his hand. The camera panned to the shocked faces of nurses, the busy corridor, the fluorescent lights that cast a cold glow across the scene. David paused at the threshold, watching them adjust wires and drapes, his breath catching at the sight of the space where his daughter would soon rest. Before entering, he glanced back toward the surgical wing. The intensity of the night had carved something new into his face: strength, clarity, resolve. He pressed his thumb to the signature line of the final document Robert had sent him digitally, submitting it with a soft beep. With that, the last piece fell into place. Employees whispered in hallways with wide eyes. The ethics committee announced an emergency meeting. Someone leaked internal emails showing Michael had been unreachable during a financial crisis earlier that week, too distracted to lead, even before the scandal erupted. His phone pinged relentlessly with messages from directors, attorneys, and shareholders, each one angrier than the last. Michael stood in the hospital lobby looking at the chaos unfolding on his screen. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through headline after headline. The brightest parts of his career, his reputation, his carefully curated image were unraveling like threads pulled from a seam. He pressed a hand to his forehead, trying to steady himself, but panic tightened around his chest. Olivia sat a few feet away, shoulders hunched, face drained of color. She clutched her purse like it was the only stable thing left in the world. The ring he had given her glinted faintly on her finger, but the sparkle now felt tainted. Passersby stared at her with open disdain. One woman shook her head and muttered under her breath as she walked past. Olivia flinched. She had never been on a stage like this, never faced judgment so public and so merciless. Her fantasy had evaporated, leaving only the sharp edges of reality. "Michael," she whispered, voice cracking. "This is bad, really bad." He snapped his head toward her. "I know that." Olivia swallowed. "People are saying you abandoned your wife. They are saying she almost died." His jaw tightened. "It is not like that." But even he did not sound convinced. While the world outside erupted, David Carter met privately with his attorney, Robert Hale, in a quiet consultation room on the second floor. Robert had already spread documents across the table, each sheet bearing a small but powerful piece of evidence. The hospital call logs, the security footage, the witness statements collected from nurses and the security guard, screenshots of the viral video, time-stamped records proving the proposal had occurred during the surgery. Robert adjusted his glasses. "This is more than enough. We can file charges for abandonment, emotional cruelty, and medical neglect. And that is only the beginning. Corporate misconduct investigations are already underway. A civil suit for damages will be straightforward." David studied the papers without blinking. His expression was not triumphant. It was steady, focused, carved from the love of a father determined to protect his daughter. "File everything," he said. "He does not get to walk away from what he did." Robert nodded and began packing the documents. "I will submit the filing within the hour." Downstairs, a crowd was forming in the lobby. Reporters had gained limited access to the entrance and were waiting behind stanchions. Cameras pointed toward the hallway where Michael stood. The moment they saw him, microphones shot forward like spears. "Mr. Reeves, did you propose to another woman while your wife was in surgery? Is it true you ignored hospital calls? Do you have a statement about your wife's condition? Are you aware your company is collapsing?" Michael tried to push past them, shielding his face with his arm. His voice broke as he snapped, "Get out of my way, all of you!" Marcus Hill stepped in immediately, motioning the reporters to back up. Everyone remained behind the line, but the questions kept coming. The cameras kept flashing. Olivia stood frozen against the wall, trembling as a reporter shouted her name. She shook her head violently and whispered, "I cannot do this." Michael reached for her arm. "Come on, let's go outside." Before he could take a step, Marcus placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Reeves, you are not allowed to leave this hallway without escort, and you are definitely not going upstairs." "Ugh." Michael spun toward him. "I have a right to see my wife." David appeared at the top of the stairwell, his presence commanding immediate silence. "No. You had that right hours ago. You chose not to use it." Michael opened his mouth but said nothing. David descended the final step and stood in front of him, eyes cold. "You will leave this hospital now," he motioned to Marcus. "Escort him out." Marcus nodded. "Right this way." Michael tried to resist, but Marcus tightened his grip. "Do not make a scene," he warned softly. Reporters surged forward as Michael was led outside. The air flashed with cameras. Voices rose in a storm of accusations and questions. Olivia trailed behind him, nearly crushed by the pressure of attention. Outside the hospital doors, the crowd thickened. News vans lined the street. Microphones swung toward Michael again. His face twisted with helpless fury, but no one cared. No one protected him. No one believed any explanation he might offer. Inside, David looked through the glass panes of the lobby doors. Reporters filled the entire entrance, shouting, filming, pushing for more details. Their voices blended into a wall of sound. The world had learned the truth, and it was only the beginning. The world returned to Emily slowly, like sunlight creeping through curtains after a storm. Her eyelids fluttered, heavy and sore, as the blinding white of the recovery ward softened into focus. The hum of machines formed a gentle rhythm beside her. A warm pressure wrapped around her hand. She forced her eyes open a little more and saw the familiar shape of a man sitting beside her bed. David Carter, her father. He looked older than he had hours before, as if worry had carved new lines across his face. His hair was slightly disheveled, his jacket wrinkled from hours of sitting without moving, but his eyes glowed with a warmth she had not seen since she was a child. "Emily," he whispered, his voice thick. "Sweetheart, you are here." Her throat burned as she tried to speak. Only a rough rasp escaped. "Dad!" He leaned forward quickly, brushing her hair back from her forehead. "Do not try to talk yet. Just rest. You are safe. The babies are safe. You made it." Tears welled in her eyes, sliding down toward her temples as relief washed over her. Her memories of the night flickered in broken pieces. The ambulance, the hotel lights, Michael's face beside another woman. The terror of bleeding. The feeling of sliding into darkness. She closed her eyes again as a trembling breath left her. David squeezed her hand gently. "You are not alone anymore. I am here. I am staying." "You crossed a..." A nurse entered quietly, checking her vitals with a soft smile. "You are doing well, Emily. You will be weak for a while, but your body is responding exactly the way we hoped it would." Emily managed another whisper. "The babies. Can I see them?" The nurse nodded. "Soon. They are in the neonatal unit right now, but they are breathing on their own, strong little fighters." Emily's lips trembled into the faintest smile. She had held on for them, through pain, through fear, through betrayal. When the nurse left, David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a document. He placed it gently on the edge of the bed so she could see it once her vision fully returned. "I waited until you woke up," he said softly. "This is the paperwork ending Michael's legal access to you and the babies. Emergency separation, asset protection, full guardianship transferred to you and me until you are fully recovered." Her eyes widened slightly. "Already, he lost every right the moment he left you alone," David said. "This is your life, and I will make sure he never harms it again." Emily stared at the papers. Her mind was still foggy, but clarity dawned slowly. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the pen on the bedside table. David helped guide her hand gently until she pressed the pen to the signature line. It took effort, and her hand shook, but when her name appeared on the page, a weight lifted from her chest. It was the end of that life, and the beginning of another. When she set the pen down, she leaned back against her pillow and exhaled with something close to peace. Not happiness yet, but the first breath of freedom. Hours later, the nurses gently transferred her to a wheelchair and rolled her down the quiet hallway toward the neonatal unit. Soft lights glowed above her as she entered. A nurse lifted 2 tiny swaddled infants from their warm bassinets and placed them each in her arms. Emily gazed at them, tears spilling freely now. Their breaths were small but steady, their faces soft and new. She held them close, inhaling the scent of newborn life, feeling their warmth seep into her skin. Everything she had endured led to this moment, this miracle cradled in her arms. David stood behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "They look just like you did when you were born," he said quietly. Emily smiled, her voice barely more than a breath. "We made it, Dad." You did," he said. "You fought." For a long while, they stayed there, wrapped in a bubble of soft beeps and warm light. Emily whispered promises to her children, that she would give them a safe life, that she would never let them feel unloved, that their future would not resemble the betrayal that nearly took her from them. When she was strong enough to stand again, the nurses helped her back to her room. She rested for several days, gaining strength, eating small meals, holding her babies whenever the doctors allowed. Each day felt like a step forward. Each moment added another layer of hope. She no longer looked toward the hallway, expecting Michael to walk through the door. She no longer flinched at every footstep. That life was over. On the morning of her discharge, sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, painting the floor in warm gold. "Already, he lost every right the moment he left you alone," David said. "This is your life, and I will make sure he never harms it again." Emily stared at the papers. Her mind was still foggy, but clarity dawned slowly. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the pen on the bedside table. David helped guide her hand gently until she pressed the pen to the signature line. It took effort, and her hand shook, but when her name appeared on the page, a weight lifted from her chest. "Already, he lost every right the moment he left you alone," David said. "This is your life, and I will make sure he never harms it again." Emily stared at the papers. Her mind was still foggy, but clarity dawned slowly. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the pen on the bedside table. David helped guide her hand gently until she pressed the pen to the signature line. It took effort, and her hand shook, but when her name appeared on the page, a weight lifted from her chest. David helped her out through the main entrance. Reporters stood at a distance, kept back by hospital security, but none dared to shout. The sight of Emily, pale but strong, cradling her children, silenced even the most aggressive cameras. She took a deep breath of fresh air. Her father placed a hand at her back. "You ready?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "More than ever." They stepped forward together, leaving the shadows of the hospital behind.